Welcome to another episode of Intellicide, where we decide or try to find out who killed intelligence and murdered common sense. I'm Anthony Gentry, and my co-host is Kyle Palmenville. And on today's episode, we're going to discuss the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Nothing
How you doing today,
controversial
sir?
there. Nothing bad could happen from talking about this.
Oh no, we might get canceled, ourselves talking about that hot button issue, but we're
Yeah.
gonna give it a go.
All right. So quick take. I'll let you lead.
I think what Hamas did to initiate this situation, I think it was, it was a shame. The murdering of innocent civilians.
Shame is a bit light, but yeah.
Yeah, I will say that it was a very cunning and successful plan where they attacked on the Sabbath. I don't know if a lot of people know, but the Jewish Sabbath is on a Saturday versus what we do over here with Sunday.
Yeah.
But as someone that was in the military, I found it disturbing that that they were able to penetrate deep inside Israel and attack some of these bases, and that there was, very little resistance. Individuals were rolling out the bed from some of the accounts that I read. And granted, I'm not Jewish, and I understand that, the not working on the Sabbath, they take that very seriously. But I do think that because of the situation that they are in, especially where you have, what you would say enemies on all sides, where you would, maybe potentially have, contractors as security forces on the gates or something, during the Sabbath. And that way, while it might not provide as much security as you would like, it would be more than what you received at the start of this conflict.
Yeah, honestly, I don't even know where to start, because it's one of those things. I'm old enough to remember that this didn't start on October 7th of 2023, right?
Right.
This has been going on for many decades. This is not new. In some ways, I feel like this is predictable, what happened, because we've pulled out of the Middle East. So it feels like this conflict has kind of restarted now that the U.S. is no longer there providing easier targets. So it feels almost predictable that this would have started back up, because this is not new. Like this conflict has been going on for a long time. This is what it was like all through the 70s and 80s and 90s, honestly. I mean, I remember in the 90s when the closest they ever got to peace there was the possibility of a two-state solution. Do you remember what? And I remember I had to go down a rabbit hole, because I after this whole thing kicked off, I'm like, whatever happened to the two-state solution? Because I didn't know.
Yeah, I listen, and it's a very charged political situation, between Palestine, or the Gaza Strip, and Israel. And Israel was only formed 1948. So it relatively speaking, it's not that long ago. You probably have some grandparents or great grandparents that are still alive when this was, Israel was formed, and how that situation went down. So, there's probably a lot of animosity on their part, and grievance. But I looked at so the Gaza Strip. It's only a total of 88 square miles. Over 2 million people in that 88 square miles. That comes out to 21,000 people per square mile. That's a lot of people.
Most densely populated places on Earth.
21,000 per square mile, Kyle. That's a lot of people, man.
That's quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyone that, has ever been in an urban environment,
Mm-hmm.
and just the congestion and living on top of each other, you know what kind of, atmosphere that can bring. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to justify what they did. I'm just trying to set, a picture
Yeah.
here, so people will understand. I think that what Hamas did, wrong, totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, will say that, some of the things that Israel has done have been wrong.
Yeah.
So we have two parties that, you have to come together, you have to work it out for the benefit of future generations. Because, honestly, what we have seen, this conflict, all you're doing is breeding adversaries for future generations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things that people don't want to talk about when it's, and again, I'm on the side of human beings. Like I don't
Right.
like seeing innocents get killed, no matter
Right.
who they are.
Right.
I don't
Absolutely.
like seeing, that it's a crime against humanity for what Hamas did on October 11th.
Right.
Um,
Right.
at the same time, the whole thing is like a big moral quandary, right? Like there's like almost a no-win situation where, yeah, they're surrounded on all sides by people that want to see them exterminated, and they have been for a long time. That was part of the problem. Like part of the reason that they formed the Jewish state was because the Jewish people needed somewhere to be able to go,
Mm-hmm.
because there were all these, pogroms against them all over Europe, that they were fleeing from before World War II. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was a thing before then, before the Germans. Um, the Germans took a hatred that was already there in Europe and they carried through on it. And it's one of those things that was wrong when it happened. It was like there's so much wrong with the whole situation, with what happened to them. And it goes back to a bit, and it's a little bit hypocritical, right? Like one of my things that I've learned over time is that life is full of contradictions,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just the nature of life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of those contradictions is the fact that this is happening between two groups of people who are religious in nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they both claim religious, they both have a religious claim on that land,
Mm-hmm.
right? At the same time, religion is supposed to teach us that when something like this happens, one of the best things a human can do is show grace towards another human,
Mm-hmm.
that turning the other cheek is considered a virtue, not a weakness, that extending the hand to your enemy, even after they just smacked you, after they just attacked you, is one of the hardest things a human being can do, because it goes against our ingrained nature to seek revenge. Seeking revenge is the easy thing, but it is the thing that we are inclined, I think, hardwired to do. And that's part of the reason this whole thing is carried on. Like you said, one side hits the other, that pisses off that side, makes them angry, fuels the next attack, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a power struggle. When it first started, like these were kind of on more even terms when this whole struggle started, right? Like these were nations kind of fighting against each other. Now,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, Gaza, they call it a government. There are a lot of people there, but it has also been described by the UN as the world's largest open air prison,
Mm-hmm.
because these are people who are already defeated. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Israel pretty much already beat them, but Israel's trying not to kill, they were before now, trying not to kill them all, even though they basically defeated them. And all the two, it's frustrating to me because, like you said, I'm not Jewish. I'm not, I don't really have a stake in the game other than as a human being who hates to see other human beings suffer. And so the thing
Well,
that's frustrating, because it's easy to say from when you're outside, right? Like, why can't the two of
right.
you just get along?
Right. Right.
But it's hard to watch from the outside, because it's like I don't really want to take a side. I want to take a side of the innocents,
Well,
Like, I don't
right.
really,
You should be on the side of right,
yeah,
and when both sides are doing wrong, then right. You have a hard time picking one side. Now, I will say the things that you discuss as far as like turning the other cheek and everything that's more of a Christian you know
true.
leaning.
Well,
And
yeah.
and I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but neither
Hmm.
side is Christian. Judaism is not Christianity.
True. True.
So let's just understand that.
Yeah.
So my thing when Israel was set up, and this is one of the short-sightedness of humans not realizing that when that happened, there was gonna be some animosity from that. You're taking land from someone, and you can talk about the historical and hey, they have a claim to this land. Well, these people have been living here who knows how long.
Right.
And now you're going to say, okay, well, now it's not your land, it's their land.
Right.
And someone should have had enough foresight to say, hey, well, what are we going to do about the grievance that we just created with this
Yeah, it was
you
never
know
addressed and it
right,
festered.
it wasn't addressed. And so you have that, and then the historical nature. There's a lot of people. If you're not familiar with it, you can do some research on it. But what are called Ashkenazi Jews, and a lot of people are, their belief is that the Jews that are called Jews today are not really Jews. And listen, I'm not going to sit up here and try to explain and say that they're wrong or they're right. I don't know, because
Part of what makes it so complicated.
right. We're talking about, you're trying to go back and you're trying to actually determine who the descendants of Abraham are. I defy anybody to go back. I can't even go back, a couple of 100 years and determine who my ancestors are. And now we're going to go back thousands of years to determine
Right.
who was the descendants of Abraham. I mean, give me a break here.
Right. Which is a character in a book.
Well,
Even if
listen,
that person actually existed.
I do believe that Abraham existed. I'm a firm believer in the Bible. I'm just saying that I do not have enough wherewithal or knowledge to try to sit here and say who the descendants, whether it be Black Hebrew Israelites or whoever. Anthony Gentry cannot say who those individuals are. But I will say that the Jewish people of today call themselves Jews, live like Jews. They have taken on that mantle. So who am I to say that you are not Jews?
Well, I mean, that's part of what makes it so complicated, is that Judaism is both a religion and an ethnicity, which isn't true of other, like you can't be ethnically Muslim or ethnically Christian.
Yes.
Right. That doesn't exist, which makes the whole thing more complicated. There are people who are ethnically Jewish but don't practice the religion. And then there are people who were not ethnically Jewish but converted to Judaism as a religion.
Correct.
So what is a quote unquote Jewish person? Like, what constitutes that? Is it a belief? Is it just a religious belief, or is it only ethnicity? And then it gets to like, okay, well, now you founded a state, a nation based on that. And you're so like, if I convert to Judaism as a religion, can I then claim Israeli citizenship, even though I'm ethnically not Jewish?
That's a good question.
I mean, the whole thing is very complicated. And, not that I would want to, but it makes the whole thing a lot harder to talk about, because when you talk about the Jewish people and who they are, it's very, more complicated than it is with other religions, because it's not just a religion. And again, to the point of all this is the conflict today is incredibly sad. It's incredibly horrific. Everything that's going on is terrible. The Jewish people obviously everybody has a right to defend themselves. Right. And that's part of the problem. It all goes back to a cycle of violence. This is like the classic human cycle of violence. If there are aliens out there observing us, and they are teaching themselves about what the human cycle of violence is, I guarantee you they're using the situation in the Middle East as that example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's sad, man. Like you said, they're innocents, women, children, men. They're
And
perishing, and
what?
they just may want to. Hey, I just want to live my life.
Yeah. And what happens? So, I mean, this is what kills me about like people who are not thinking about the future. So, okay, those the people from Hamas went in and committed this stupid, horrific attack. What did they think was going to happen? Right?
Right.
It was going to invite a reprisal. And so they did, and they are right now, right? Like they're going after they took hostages. Of course, they're going to
Yeah.
come in after them. I think this
Yeah.
is all what they wanted. And part
Yeah.
of that is the poor Palestinian people who are stuck there now, who just want to live their lives, who are going to have like their whole family killed
Right.
in this. That person is then going to be the future terrorist who
Right.
would in the future then be motivated to commit some other horrific attack.
Yep.
That's the cycle of violence, that they're
Yes, sir.
creating the next attack in this situation.
Right.
Both of them. I mean, to a point, what Hamas did was akin to suicide by cop.
Yeah.
I mean, what they did was so egregious and unnecessary and terrible. Like like literally you're trying to get your
I
people
do.
killed.
They read some accounts of what occurred.
Oh yeah.
They're going and they're just, just indiscriminately shooting in the crowds. They're raping women and killing children. And it was horrific. And right. They had no care in the world for consequence. Because you can sit up here and say, I fight for the Palestinian people, but guess what? Now that these Palestinian people are suffering, what are you doing?
They're using them. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you doing? They're they have bases or outposts near hospitals and whatnot, so they don't get bombed and what.
Oh yeah, they put their bases in the basements of hospitals and
Yeah.
things like that. But again,
Right.
like to your point, 21,000 people per every square mile. Like, how do
Right.
you not have human shields
Yeah.
at that point?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's 21,000 people within every square mile.
Yeah.
Like, how do you
Dude,
not
that's a lot
end
of
up?
people, bro.
Yeah,
A lot of
but
people.
part of it too, the leaders of Hamas aren't even there. Like,
Right.
they're not even in Gaza.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's and
Yeah.
what's happening on school, and this is where it gets with Americans giving their opinion on this, because America is so in bed with Israel to the point that our government, did you know that in 35 American states it's illegal to boycott Israel?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Google that. It is
Wow.
actually illegal for you to boycott, like it. So like, let's say you're the victim of a hurricane
Uh-huh.
and you go to FEMA for some federal assistance.
Right.
35 of the states, if like you go to the government for assistance, they make you sign a waiver that says that you have not and will not boycott Israel. Otherwise, you can't get assistance from the government.
Wow. No, I didn't know that. I did not
I
know
mean,
that.
it's so.
See, you know what? But listen, we've had discussions about this before about free speech. And so like, right, why does my need for assistance here in America require me to give up the right to protest Israel?
Right.
The two are not even related. And the fact that like what is happening on a lot of college campuses now, I don't prescribe to a lot of what some right wing or conservative speakers say,
so
but I will say that they have the right to say what they want to say, and there may be people that want to hear that. We have to really take a look at what we are willing to cancel, because debate is you're talking and conversing about conflicting ideas, and we can't have a debate if we are unwilling or we refuse to listen to the other side. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that you have to agree with them, but you have to be able to take in and then process what the information that they're giving or spewing, and then refute it and rebut it. You can't do that if those other individuals can't even speak,
or if you're not going to listen.
right?
this again goes to like personal philosophy and everything. My personal, I guide my own life like with a certain set of advice that I got when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
One of them comes from a book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mm-hmm.
And the one habit out of that book that stuck with me is seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Right.
In that, before you can have a dialogue with someone, you have to understand what they're saying. Before you can come up with a coherent response, you have to be able to really understand what they're saying. And so that should really be the goal of conversation for most people, is to listen and understand what the other people are saying.
Right.
But most people don't. They go into it with the intention of just being heard.
Right.
They already know what they want to say. Doesn't really matter what the other person's trying to tell them.
Yeah.
And that's partially American culture, social media effect.
Yeah. I just think that, the level of discourse in this country is at a bare minimum.
It's terrible. And which is feeding into this whole thing with just the extremism on both sides with, I mean, there is, like I said, I'm on the side of humans and the innocent. And I don't really want, like when you say pick a side, like I don't really pick the side of either government. I pick the side of the people who are being affected on both,
Right.
And
and since we're talking about college campuses, some of the anti-Semitism that has been exhibited on some of these campuses is appalling as well.
Yeah. I mean, they're going way too far on the other side, where it's like, okay, neither side is innocent, but to go like on these college campuses, some people are going so far as to just be straight up anti-Semitic about it. And this is where it gets so confusing about that, because it is Jewish people, again, can be a religion and which is when you criticize the actions of a government, like that in that government claims to represent a whole ethnicity and religion, like then they turn around and say, well, any criticism of that something that government did means that you're against those people existing. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily true, but there are people on the left who take it that far, where when they're criticizing Israel, they're like, from the river to the sea. That's like a chant that they use. The people who want to get, basically kill all the Israelis use that to say they want to drive Israel out of the Middle East.
Let me ask you something.
When you hear that on a college campus in America, it's like either you don't understand what you're saying, or you're being just as extreme as Hamas in a way. You're literally parroting some of the things that Hamas says.
We both have children. Yeah. You ever criticize your kids?
All the time.
Oh, you don't love your kids, Kyle?
Of course.
What are you doing? Seriously. Now there's a way to criticize. There's a way to criticize or whatever and be reaffirming to, say, hey, you could have done that better. I expect more of you, etc. If somebody criticizes a government, doesn't mean that we don't love. Like, I can't stand when people say, oh, you criticized America. Why don't you go and live in one of these other countries? If you
criticize it, then you gotta leave. Yeah.
I was in the military. At one point in my life, I was sitting up here talking about dying for this country. Don't tell me that I can't sit up here and I can't criticize my country. The fact is that if you criticize something, if anything, that means you care enough to criticize. I don't sit up here and comment on things that I don't care about.
Right.
So I
felt it important enough to say something.
Right. So yeah, we can't be misguided to think, some of these Jewish students, whether they're, religious or ethnically Jewish, they're being asked to denounce Israel and renounce their, I guess, Judaism. Like, are you kidding me right now? That's crazy.
It is. That's going way too far.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I can say like, hey, I don't like what they did. I don't think that is right. But, when you're sitting up here asking somebody to denounce something, like, hey, let's not be extremists here.
And you can denounce an action, but to denounce a people or a religion that's something totally different. And that's
right.
Over the line. That's not appropriate.
Exactly. Yep.
It is the same kind of otherism and hate that, causes all of this stuff in the first place,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, another point that we needed to bring up, this conflict now, and now listen, I got my own problems with President Joe Biden, and age is one of them. But I will say that this president is probably facing a lot more geopolitical turmoil than a lot of presidents in recent history. When you figure you got this Hamas Israel conflict, you got the Ukraine, Russia war that's still going on, and now you got China chomping at the bit to invade Taiwan. So and trust me, China is watching this, and they're watching what we're doing in Ukraine or whatever, and they're going to use that to determine what they do with Taiwan.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this too goes to the government shutdown. If the government shuts down, it makes it a lot more likely that China will invade Taiwan.
All right.
Going back to that whole thing with, if the U.S. government defaults on its loans, our credit rating tanks, because people will then know we can't be trusted to pay our bills.
Right.
And that conflict, that inner conflict in America that these people are fomenting, will have real world consequences. Like China is watching what we do to see whether they're clear to move.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think that this moment in time, especially with that Ukraine-Russia conflict, is showing how we are easily distracted, and we can't do two things at the same time, and again, Russia is in the wrong. I truly believe Russia is in the wrong. I don't want to hear about Nazism in Ukraine, and
that's nuts.
They're
claiming that the Jewish leader of Ukraine is a Nazi. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
You honestly think Russia is the paragon and wants to stamp out Nazism? Give me a break. No, I don't believe that for one second.
Put the Soviet Union back together. That's it's no more complicated than that.
Right. Yeah. So but I think that we can't get distracted and pull our attention fully away from Ukraine as well, even though what is going on in Israel and Gaza is a tragedy.
It is, and it's concerning too, because a lot of the people who were serious policymakers have been driven out of Washington. A lot of Republicans who were the serious people in their party are retiring, because it's been taken over by a show, a clown show.
Yeah.
In a way. I mean, there's literally a whole faction of the Republican Party that just wants media attention to be able to push whatever their pet narrative is. You know?
Yeah.
In I don't know, some circles, I mean, this goes back to what our previous episode where we talked about, Mike Johnson, the guy that they elevated to be the head of their party, the speaker. He represents basically a really crazy minority in America.
Right.
Yeah. The same people that, part of what we should probably mention is that there is an element in America of the Christian. So like you mentioned, this is a conflict between Jewish people and Muslims, but in America, part of the reason that the right is so fervent about this is because of the same end time conservative Christians, the people who believe that these are the end times and it's all going to play out like it did in Revelations in the Bible, and that in order for that to happen, they need to have Israel exist in the Middle East. And so they don't care about what happens to the Jewish people, because they believe they're all going to hell anyway. But they need Israel to exist so that this story can take place. And that's their whole point. That's why they have a dog in this fight. That's the whole reason they care. Not because they care about the people involved or the innocents. They just they want this story that they believe in religiously, literally their religious beliefs, to happen. They want the story from the Bible to take place. And so they're trying to set up the conditions to make this happen.
Right. Well, I'll say this. And I'm gonna, go with what my pastor said this past Tuesday. Right is right, and some of the things that are going on over there are wrong. And, as a Christian, you have to point out, like, hey, we can't, because they kill women and children, just say like, okay, now we're going to go and kill women and children. That's the kind of, like, coming from the Marine Corps, right? We used to sing ditties like that or whatever. And I'm a young man or whatever, and that's what we did. But, I can't go along with that, sentimentality that, hey, we're just gonna go out and wipe out everybody. Like, come on, that's not the Christian thing to do.
I agree. And not to just to play devil's advocate for a second, just to talk about, like I mentioned before, life is full of contradictions. Mm-hmm. And I acknowledge that at the same time, part of the contradiction is trying to be a moral person, yet at the same time acknowledging the Machiavellian fact that a lot of times immoral things work to secure power. Mm-hmm. George Washington attacked the British on Christmas morning, right? Mm-hmm. Like when they were celebrating Christmas.
Right.
It was considered by the British to be a very underhanded move. Mm-hmm.
Right.
We consider, that was smart, right? Because he won.
Right.
Well, both it's contradictory, right? Is it a moral? We think of George Washington, we hold him up as this moral leader because he did some things that were moral, but at the same time, in order to win a war, he had to do some things that were not so moral. And that's part of the contradictions that just it's part of life. That's just
Yeah.
And part of the situation is that Israel has to get those hostages back. Their responsibility to their own citizens is they're going to go in and try to get those hostages back.
Dude, why wouldn't they?
Right.
Why wouldn't they?
There's going to be casualties, and it's terrible. And I feel sorry for the people who are affected by that. But at the same time, Hamas really did this by kicking that hornet's nest.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But at the same time, like all of this feels like it's just a continuing cycle. Like this isn't the end of it.
No, by no means. By no means.
The people who are going to commit the next atrocity are being formed.
Well, I will say that I pray something good comes out of this, whether it be a 2-state solution or, some kind of discussion that leads to, hey, we can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I pray for everyone on both sides that have been affected, that, have had family members killed, that had possibly raped and tortured and, mutilated. It's a shame. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, we are out of time.
Okay. Well, it was nice talking to you, sir. Another hot button topic.
Yeah, it was.
Please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we hope to see you next time.
Topics.
Right. All right. This is Anthony Gentry and Kyle Palmenville signing out of Intellicide.